truly a holographic being that has offloaded all of its qualities and conditions, and therefore the alien strains are beginning to reveal themselves not as something else, but in a way a deeper allowance of our own greater roots. Because think of star travel as star seeding, meaning it's not to go there because you would impose yourself on a planet, but to seed yourself into that planet. And think of that not being one system, because in a hologram, interestingly enough, like an atom, you have to cover the field of all the probabilities. If you think of reaching a point where what we need to know can't be known by simply building another piano. In other words, there really is this question of how do we trust the instrument? How do we trust that the deep archaeology of who we are is showing up, but it's showing up humanized. Otherwise it would sweep us away. And when it does, usually it becomes very confusing for people.
Yeah.
And I do feel like that's why everything wants to bring us back, really, like the universe collapsing into the palm of the hand, saying, I want to calm your heart, because herein is the truth that you are all of this, but also the great gift that you are uniquely you.
Understand that this, on 9/11/2001, expressed itself as the hieroglyph of the human soul. This is what it told me it was. 10 years into working on the hieroglyph of the human soul, I think, well, what's the acronym? And it's THOTHS, which is Thoth, or Thoth's Library, which helps us understand the journey of as above, so below. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
Yeah. That's why, if you think about a symbolical theater, everything that is a picture language is trying to establish, as the ancestors have. Once we can talk in pictures, your ancestors might interpret the pictures differently, but they're going to hit on the same, in a sense, notes, the same qualities. And this is one of the things to our pattern now, to understand that this journey that begins on 9/11, and I've been painting every day for the last 17 years, is the story of a deeper devotion and love to the story of at least where I live, let these things matter. And I think art is, for all of us, where we see not the judgment of others, but the welcoming, saying if we can inspire one another rather than critique one another, we'll hold a space not of debate, but of celebration. And that's why this is my home. I think it's very important to think about context. In your home, you live in 24 hours a day. So you're going through all the weather conditions of your life. And when you're at home, you're living with those you love. And that you have to navigate the different personalities. Love is a difficult thing, but so is a well-written play. You know, so is a well-painted painting. And we're great art. If we were, in a sense, not so complex, if we could unriddle ourselves, we'd be far less interesting. But the deeper we go into the mystery, as we know, the deeper the mystery takes us. And that's really what happens in this room.
Leigh, we've sort of had this conversation going here on the run, setting up, but who are you? in a nutshell.
That's a very good question. Not to be overly philosophical. My name is Leigh McCloskey, and I've had a professional acting career, possibly known to some of your audience members from shows like Dallas and was it General Hospital and Inferno with Dario Argento. So a lot of different, I had a very long acting career, but during those days, I also had the good fortune to meet Carla, my wife, back in actually my first show back in 75, 76. We got married in 78. Nice. And we've lived here for the last 39 years. So we've lived here since 1981. We've had and raised our two daughters. And we just had a grandchild, so I'm now a happy grandfather.
Congratulations, yeah.
And I'm the son of of Malibu. It's where I grew up. So my home is in Malibu, and a lot of the story that I talk about really is about that sense of finding home, because who am I is a great question. And in a sense, if I talk about myself in terms of career, I'm one thing, but really I think the career, and a lot of us are saying that we've all been the custodians of something more precious that maybe the world wasn't interested in, but we were. And so I've had 39 years of discussion groups here. Every Tuesday night and night, looking at Eastern tradition, Western tradition, really spending time with Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, and really trying to get at the archaeology of the human soul, but not as a debate. You know, in a way, one has to navigate the world of debate. But when we're home, and this I really took from acting, is how do you create a place where let's get together and inspire each other, and like the library, let's draw from the resource that we've inherited, because an inspired performance is much more interesting than just sitting and complaining about things. And so my career was and has been as an actor professionally, which allowed me to live here, which allowed me to balance my life with the conversation and need for philosophical input, but also domestic input. The relevance of really starting a question from where you love, and you're with those you love. So a lot of this is, in a way, my greater identity is made manifest through my art.
But yesterday you said you're a consciousness kung fu master, or something of that sort.
Yes, we have to become the martial artist of consciousness. Really a master martial artist of consciousness, because martial arts are essentially knowing what to pay attention to, what to take personally, and what to navigate. And so a lot of that is this, now it is about marshaling the sense of the martial arts, of what we pay attention to, how we pay attention to it. And so a lot of this is the deeper archaeology of the soul, so to speak.
An archaeology of the soul.
Do you know that's it? Because an archaeologist digs, right? He doesn't know. He's not assuming. Right. He's going deeper, or she's going deeper. Right. And I feel like that's what this is trying to tell us, is that the last place we need to dig, or the place we really need to dig and to trust, is this subjective place of where we live. Do you know, in a sense, trying to resolve the question of what it means to be you or me, or what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. When we understand and honor the fact that there isn't a right version, but much more of this sense of place, if we place the value that each conversation is necessary to the larger conversation, then we have, I think, what this house has become. It's always been a place of community, where people have said, at least here, let these things matter. So I feel all of the art was in response to these things as well, because as an actor, you're always making your way, trying to get a role, trying to pay your bills. So it's a very different conversation, because it is so dependent on so many other factors. But the artist, then my dad was a painter, so I never worried about being a painter. My dad was too good of a painter, so it freed me. I said, I'm the actor that paints. You know, in other words, that it was this ability to use painting as a way of connecting with energy. A way of connecting with character. As a matter of fact, it was painting when I was a Juilliard that allowed me to find the violence in a character, but also started to relate to that sense, not as paint as an illustration, but as a medium of emotion. And this took me much more into the indigenous direction, or the ancient Chinese way of painting, which was not to illustrate anything, but to really allow that expression to be breath itself. And I thought that's very much like the actor. You know, how do you connect with the emotional breath? And because I was trying to find it, it was becoming a painting, but not a painting as a painter, much more of an act of creative engagement. And so this led me in a way, the back door that wasn't about art in a cultural sense, but much more in, you'd say, almost an antidote to how, as creative beings, we do have to live in a world that can't be about what is not that, you know, what's not there. We are in a place where we have to say that we do need to cultivate, become gardeners of this nature of what I call the archaeology of the soul, give it a place to grow.
And through that, you've created all of this. This is the archaeology of the soul, this room,
and it even calls itself the hieroglyph of the human soul.
The hieroglyph, yeah.
And what's important about a hieroglyph, because the tarot, all symbolical structures, it'll help us in our conversation as we go deeper, because once we understand why the picture language is a universal language, why math is a universal language, we'll begin to understand that this is in a way where the instrument begins to discern its greater musicality, in a sense its greater, what you call greater field. But it doesn't feel displaced. It starts to pull itself into a greater coherence. And I would almost liken that when we step out of being the audience and we step into being part of the play.
And that's what drew me to this conversation, is my series Interview with Ed. I've spoken to all these people who channel these extra dimensional beings, and ETs from Pleiades to Arcturus to the Zeta Reticuli, and the information that's coming from that conversation, it's funneling into this conversation about archetypes and about story, and that's sort of what they're saying. And I'm finding all this overlay from indigenous teachings to the art. When I saw your video of the tarot explanations, there were so many synchronicities and details in that conversation that I thought, okay, this is where the next conversation needs to happen. I need to talk to an archaeologist of consciousness to really help understand and maybe put bring down to earth the conversation I've been having with these extra dimensional beings. I think it's my hope today that we can dive into these different ET archetypes and then ground them into the archetypes that we already have here, and find the synchronicities and find the overlay, and maybe have a better understanding of what is all of this, right?
The myth here, I'll just tell you briefly the story that's emerged here, because it's quite contextual and fascinating. It says that we began not with not knowing. We began as vast knowing. Essentially, we think at the speed of light. The question was, how do we slow this light down? How do we bend the light? How, as Einstein said, slow thought down to a rate where we can perceive it. When this becomes our fundamental understanding of this star being, we start to understand our pyramids and obelisks. They were amplifiers. They were all about what we think of from a theatrical point of view, or rock and roll, right? Where you stand in the same presence, the music lifts you. So you're all on the same page. It's not a debate over anything. It's a celebration of alignment.
Coherence.
Yeah, coherence. And that's the question of the obelisk, this falling over. Do you see this falling into time of totem poles, of obelisks, meaning the upright father, the knowledge of the divine mother, that there's this union of these qualities. And that's what symbols also are about, the divine ones, the gods coming from the ancient times. But if you think of this as a seed pattern, and you start to see it as an organic pattern, yes, you inseminate with this seed ideal. You instruct from these ideal states, and even the joke here is that the 9-inch square tile that this is painted on said, you see, even the linoleum had a pre-existing geometry before I painted it, as if to say that these qualities pre-exist, they're structural, and that we drape reality and our understanding of that upon these structural truths.
The sacred geometry, the Fibonacci, all of these, the 3, the 6, the 9, these magical numbers that we find that are, throughout creation.
Exactly.
The fractal.
They're keys. And that's why the tarot are called keys. Because once we understand archetypes are keys, we start to understand what the library says. Once you understand that the north, the south, the east, and the west here all exist, all the books you like and all the books you don't like exist here. Meaning that the conversation isn't about the rejection of any part, but there's going from seeing ourselves only in reflection, for and against, to moving back into a circle. It's very interesting, Tai Chi, right? It's this movement, because it's not just, as you know, movement for movement's sake, but it is this sense of creating an energetic relationship that allows us to restore you'd say, the sensual knowing, that our bodies are ancient. Yeah, that's what's not understood. We always say, oh, this is my body. No, it's a human body that you are within, which is an extraordinary way to think, that you are wrapping within this ancient being that is saying, yeah, I don't want to overwhelm you. I think we're on overwhelm. And sort of the last point here that I think is so important is that one of the great revelations that came to me recently is that a painting is breath, that when you paint, you breathe, and that a painting captures breath. So a painting becomes as a lung. And that's why a picture language is important. Because like music, it wants to breathe us. It wants to dissolve resistance, because in a way it insists on a subjective relationship. And that cultivates trust in the truth that the things are not abstract for one another, but even in the story of the alien with the elongated head here appearing, saying that, no, you created a smaller head, and the story of being born at a time to slow down, you'd say like shooting an electron into a stack of books, it slowed it down so that finally you and I can sit here as human, but finally go the other way and realize, but we are woven of this great story that allows us to be its expression, but still, like this room, part of a living creative womb that is trying to say, now you're getting it. Now you're beginning to reposition your questions. And that's when the question of aliens, like the question of love, will not be the trust of the optical, but of the creative. And how that has influenced storytellers. How that is, like you, influencing your relationship with what you call creation. And I believe that this is what allows creation itself on a quantum level to say, we're being given permission. You know, it's like if you don't allow it, it can't be. And that's, again, going back to this seed of the out-breath, our story, the in-breath, ourselves, and this great love affair that, wow, we're part of an extraordinarily heroic being. This is over and over again, you won't remember. But as you discover, you'll finally put yourself back together. And the key, I feel, for all of us is we don't realize it yet, but the time component is like putting on our hands. It took a long time because we didn't want to put our head on first, but last. And I think of your home being your head, your heart, maybe, not where you live, but really where your heart is.
Right.
Oh, I get it. I can't connect to any of this until I put my head on. And that's why the lamp there, you see with Eve, is this story of the delight of mind. Loves all the stories. And that's what illumines not what we like or don't like, but the greater vision of why we've been willing to go through these qualities to finally say we're home. And when we are home, we're not in judgment. We are seeking to balance responsibility with vision, keep our feet on the ground so the branches of our tree don't take us off the earth.
Well, so that leads into, what I wanted to do in our conversation today is sort of cover some of these ET races that I'm sure you're familiar with, what many people following this show are familiar with. And the first one that we talked about, the elongated heads, and the story of birth. For me, in my research, it seems to connect closer to the race of the Arcturians. And just to give you, you've probably heard this term, the Arcturian race, or have you?
Yeah, but please.
So my understanding from the Arcturian exposure that I've had is they are these elongated heads. They are the most, I would say, advanced race of beings in this lore of ET. Many other beings from the Pleiades star system in Orion and wherever, they go on these spiritual pilgrimages to the Arcturian star system to learn the deeper meaning of existence.
Makes sense.
They even have, there's even a discussion of this Arcturian gate that is, for many beings, and I don't know if this is for all, but they say that many beings, to come into this reality on Earth, they must pass through this Arcturian gate, this birth canal, and they need the Arcturian technology to do that. So there's this womb aspect, this giving birth aspect to the Arcturians. There's this, they're almost considered like the Jedi of the galaxy, because they're so advanced in their beingness. They're always seen wearing robes, that traditional Jedi outfit. They're associated with blue. Many people see them as bluer beings or have a blue tint to them. But that, just to give you that context, what would you connect that to as far as the other archetypes that we understand?
It's very intriguing, because I think that what we're really dealing with is the above, the below, and the in-between being one, meaning that quite literally you see the territory. And this is the relationship, you would almost say, of the first 5 archetypes of the magus, not the magician, but the magus, the seed bearer, and the high priestess, in a sense, the inside and outside. But you start to see it divides in one way. They give birth
essentially to the Empress, and this is Sophia. This would be this room, and womb, meaning that that from nothing is born, and then her mirror, her reflection, is the Emperor. So we have this quality like yin yang. Do you see the one within the other? And the fifth, and this is where I feel the Arcturians are, which is right here. You see, it actually corresponds with the Milky Way. It's this corpus callosum. It's the line between, but it's also, if you use this as the eye, do you see that we're born looking into the world? This is the greater lens of wonder. And that's why, to a great degree, that quality doesn't exist in time. It does exist in depth. And those qualities, therefore, are almost, you'd say, the filtering qualities of universal life force, which is translating itself, slowing itself down into a human scale, meaning that in itself, as a universal or archetypal force, it would be overwhelming. We have to understand that much of this, think of trying to remind you, but more like with lightning. So it doesn't light up, because then you'd want to go there. But more like to light up and realize that we as human now are a composite of these qualities. Meaning, going back to Atlantis, the sons of Belial and the sons of the one God. It's this story that we've actually assimilated all these qualities. And that's why I would say that the Arcturians are, in a way, the pattern keepers. I think this has a lot to do with this, because this quality of consciousness is the library. And it would say our quality is always to translate star knowledge into the terminology of a given planet, to essentially humanize it. So they are the guardians of star systems. This is what becomes an intriguing quality, a unifying principle. In a sense, maybe different worlds are looking for a unifying principle, and that what has escaped our attention is, like atoms, we've had to cluster in our particular uniformity, and now maybe what this is getting at is, it's almost like speaking of the quintessence alchemically, that the four directions of the, air, earth, fire, and water, the four qualities, are brought together in the center.
Right.
But if you think of that going, in a way, this way, and that being why, and it aligns with the Maya calendar ending on the winter solstice.
Right.
Because this is where the quality of consciousness, you see, stops in its rotating in time and stands erect. If you think of the toroid, this is also what allows the stargate to open, to be translated into knowledge and come up through our root system, our human equation.
Right.
Because if we experience something untranslatable, it remains there. The genius of our filtration is to take this Arcturian knowledge, and I really do feel that you could look at these as, if you were diagramming as in the old Renaissance diagrams. You'd say, yeah, this is really like the seraphim, the dominions, the cherubim, that you're really looking at qualities of consciousness that in their very physiology reveal, it's not the forward mind that we have, it's this elongated sense of the flow. So those would be, you start to even, you can, and the more imaginative, and I think this is why it's very good to use an actor's tool of creating a character, that many of these things aren't meant, they're meant to be tinctures. They're meant to, a bit like a poem, light up in you. And that's why it's important that we trust that you're not trying to gather one localized sense of meaning. In a sense, you're always gathered around this greater mystery. But I think it's finally the greater mystery going, that's actually the nourishment that's trying to awaken why you need to trust your curiosity. Because the only way to translate these things is not, in a way, just to download them, but to actually transmute them. And think of our dream life, right? We're always trying to create we always realize that it's symbolical.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't look at our own life that way. And that's why we don't look at the Arcturians, we don't look at them as those that free yourself from the optics, and you trust that you are a navigator. Then this greater mind doesn't, in a way, make you want to float away, but gives you, almost like I felt with the cathedral, right? You walk in this harsh life, see the rose windows, and be restored to a sense of there's a greater beauty. This is the breath I needed. I'm not getting out of anything, but I'm being restored by being reminded that there is something more beautiful than difficulty. That's the message on the vertical. I think that's the wisdom of the library, right?
Yeah.
That you stand in a beauty that's unimaginable because it came not because of something, but in spite of something. It never overcame evil, but it was in spite of that evil it still chose.
I was going to save the Arcturians for last, but it just kind of came in as the
I kind of feel maybe that's the larger theater.
Yeah.
And if we can put ourselves in that mind, I even have drawings where I was exploring this, and it was because my dad would always say, when you can't talk about something, paint it. And I've always had philosophical discussion groups and fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'd always use drawing as a way of asking questions, and that's why I was so surprised when these elongated heads, these qualities kept showing up, and there were other alien forms, structures that would show up. And I kept feeling that they were trying to, like dream imagery, slowly move me away from assumption. And then to lead into, we are in communion, but in the same way a book in the library is not to come at you, but for your curiosity to finally join us. And like a book, as you join us in communion, we'll start to transform the questions you ask. Isn't that what happened with you?
That's exactly what happened. You know, I had the questions. I saw something out of this world, and then I began to ask questions. And here we are 10 years later, 10 plus years, and the questions have been refined, and it's like I'm still asking the questions, but they're sculpted questions now. They're they're lived questions. They're earned questions.
Earned questions.
Yes, exactly. One last thing on the Arcturians. So it's the Arcturian race, or the Arcturian star is I believe the brightest star in the northern hemisphere. It's also associated. It's in the Bear constellation. I should be more versed in this stuff, but I'm not.
No, the Bear.
I'm just like kind of. It kind of comes, and I'm like, oh, I take these little nuggets that kind of resonate.
No, I kind of feel like that's the romance of it. You're not supposed to burden yourself with remembering. You're supposed to, in a way, rediscover it continually.
Yeah. What is the Bear in your archetypal
the bear
research?
Is fascinating because from indigenous symbology, but it's even in alchemy, the bear is the great mother. So she's and this is of course the narrative of the Pleiades, from the Pleiades, the sense of the great mother, the great bear, and that's why you have the bear clan, this relationship to the stars. But also, if we don't look at that simply from the surface, but begin to understand the power of the bear, begin to become the bear, begin to feel how that feels in the body. This is also what you do say, if we're supplying the emotional nature to a composite human form. This is the part of the qualities of the galaxy within us that become, do you see this deeper nature? And you'd almost say part of the door then is, how does this energy feel? Because this is what connects us. Again, not optically, because that's in time, which is the illusion, but in tone. And so that's what's very interesting about the bear, again, being this look to why I take on different animal forms in terms of different constellations.
Right.
Because every animal, this is of course martial arts as well, right? Has a particular universal wisdom and is centered in a type of genius alignment that as we learn from them, we become, in a sense, the gatherer of their wisdom.
Right, and that's where a lot of the indigenous teachings, use the spirit animals, and they use the connecting and to these animals as a teacher, as a guide to, again, archetypal stuff, that we see in our cave paintings and in our hieroglyphics, and Chinese writing and Asian writing uses a closer version to the hieroglyphs.
Yes,
with the kanji and
absolutely,
so just seeing all these correlations, and now we simplify things, but then a lot gets lost. Because it's too simple.
Well, I almost feel like that's the question, is that once we see that we're always languaging, a bit like Adam always naming, is that it wasn't one language. It was almost like the minutiae of languaging that would finally free us to realize, botany, alchemy, all these different in a way, disciplines, when we think from the library's perspective or the larger perspective, they're all necessary ways of languaging into human story these greater conditions, in a way slowing all these different star connections. If you think of a Renaissance model of macrocosm, microcosm, man being the universe in miniature, going back to the Vitruvian Man of Leonardo, we begin to realize why all of the organs have both the attribution of a star, or of a planet, and that the body's health is, as Paracelsus taught, that we are not essentially deterministic in terms of the stars, but the genius is that it is the what he called the greater man, the Homo Maximus, meaning that the heavens held the design of who and what we were. We were the Homo Monoris. And that greater pattern then showed in the star structure, and as the stars came and went, he said, this created the archetypal structure. And the genius of our star system is that it lets us have a conversation with our greater nature, do you see, by projecting it into these archetypal and planetary influences. And that's why if you were trying to have, like I had an orb manifestation here, it was extraordinary. But it was pictures taken of the orbs in geometrical relationship. And I realized here they had a structure where they could finally reveal, not again through words, but through relationship and remarkable photographs, that we are trying to create a condition. Think of your brain being this little, pea in the middle of an enormous being.
Yeah.
And it wants everything to sort of be human, now human terms.
Sure.
And all of these different parts of the body are going, no, you'll never get, in a sense, you'll never get to Saturn. You'll never get to, so don't make it about what you're not, but begin to turn as we did in the Renaissance. And I think this is why holographic knowledge is so important. A lot of the models are so important now because they're saying, of course, we are a projection. We are, if you think of here, right, as the lens, the library, you'd say we are the projection into an atomic body, meaning a light body, right, a scintillating energy body that's holding, through some form of generosity, all of its atoms, all of its universe is scintillating, carrying on all of their business, pancreas and heart and all, somehow, to finally say, but wait a minute, just like that, and just like the library, so little of what you can actually know is what is comprehensible. What is comprehensible is the fact that you are the center of this awareness.
Right.
Do you see, like a sea captain finally go, oh, I get it. I'm in a vessel.
Yes.
I don't own the sea, nor, in a way, I have to understand that I've needed to build a vessel to let me navigate these waters, but the mystery of the waters will never be solved because the waters aren't interested in what the vessel thinks. Do you see?
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yes. That sums up this experience, I think. But Bashar always says we always feel that the soul is inside of the body, but in fact, he says it's reversed. The soul is creating the body, and we are not. The soul is not housed inside. The body is housed inside the soul. So if we can sort of do the reverse thing on what we've been taught and sort of see the world, and that way the soul is actually the water, and the body is navigating in the soul, which in the waters, that is us. And when we can see it that way, then this navigating this experience becomes a little less stressful because we kind of can understand that, I am the water. I may not fully grasp that, fully understand that now, but if I just have that knowing, so as things are delivered to me, experiences and situations and relationships, then I don't judge them and I don't put them away. I can accept them as this is me delivering me a present. And then which allows me to be more present in time.
But think of that as permission, right?
Yes.
I mean, think about performing. We are what we have to stumble over until we finally give our self-permission to go, just make an ass out of yourself. Step up and, something frees you to finally go, I don't need to figure it out. I need to give myself to it.
Right.
It'll figure it out. And I almost feel like that's the boat on the shore. We've built the boat, we know the piano, but we're not playing the piano. We think the boat's to be left on the sand.
Right.
And fight over what kind of boat you have. And I kind of feel like we're actually being set adrift. And we're finding ourselves in a different medium, which is the medium of the ocean itself, coming up in these tidal waves, literally in one way or another, in people's lives that are, I think, rocking the boat, so to speak.
Right.
But if you think of that as a trigger of like suddenly waking up in a dream and going, oh man, I thought I was on land.
Right.
Like, give me an oar, you start to, and we realize that the genius of who we are is we adapt very quickly. And to me, that's even, on a deeper level, I think of the Arcturians as almost Arthur and the Arthurians, the sense of that Arthur says that the
ideal of the Grail of Camelot was no one of us. It was each of us held to the ideal of the possibility of such a thing. And each knight went on his own journey, his own adventure. And it wasn't that each knight would attain the Grail. It was this realization that the stories we brought back of attaining and not attaining would create a sense of the shared truth that the Grail isn't any one story. It's not in its attainment. It's in how it transforms the life. You know, so this whole sense of Arthur is that all ideals of Camelot, and this was during the beginning of the ego, so it was a battle, and it was about a sword and a stone. But this story is what happens after Camelot falls, after we have lost that greater outer ideal, and in the ashes we are asked to find once again that Grail, but not as that which is, again, as you talk about, outward, but a deeper inner light. And maybe that's what we grasp onto as storytellers and living through these things, to really say that I don't want to tell you something I think you ought to know. I want to share with you something I think might inspire you. And that lifts us both.
Right.
And to me, that is choice and where we're at now, and why, you know, I think a lot of going back to the races, we might look at these as archetypal and perceptual rings that we're composed of, almost like how do we rise up, even as an acting exercise. All right, I want you to have an elongated head. I want you to feel a serpentine body. How does this feel? I want you to rise up into that knowing. I want you to feel the library. Do you see, you start to say, oh, as an acting exercise, yeah, I could do it because I'm not having to believe it. And I feel like that's what a lot of these things are trying to say. Yeah, now you're using your art, your creative qualities, your imagination, to free your improvisation. And think of a relationship, right? So long as you believe in me, we're not a relationship. But once we believe in our relationship, we'll discover one another. And isn't that the creative process as well? You don't know how to do something. It grows. It grows from your curiosity and the willingness to understand that the relationship is not in achieving something, but in realizing, as in all relationship, it's the process of, in a way, getting it wrong, figuring it out. How do we do this? Because that, I'm convinced, if we look at it as a martial art, is saying most of what's training you is not words. It's I'm teaching you what to pay attention to. I'm teaching you what's real. I'm teaching you, do you know? This is very important.
Well, and just like in the dream, all of the players, you know, Carl Jung says, I believe, that they're all you. They're all aspects of you. So if you can, this waking dream, if we can have that same point of view, and we can adapt that, then the dream becomes more lucid.
And I think then the characters aren't being believed in, so they're willing to participate.
Right.
Do you know, and if you think of the veil being, I want you to draw me forth. I want you to create music. I want you to do it so it's a love affair with me. Because in a way, just to be entitled, oh yes, finally we've proven that there's aliens. I think that the whole point is that, of course there are, but they're not going to show up. They're more interesting than that. Because in a way, that which doesn't show up forces us to create space for the willingness for engagement. And to me, that's why this becomes a very sacred space, in a sense, the unexpected temple, because who would, in a sense, there's nothing, this is the act of love. And I rather feel like that's when our celestial elders say, once you understand that we offloaded into the books, we translated ourselves into multidimensionality, like with the 3D effect here. So look at us in more than one way, then you'll begin to understand that it is a time of relationship, not of proof. You know, this sense of looking at things in more than one way and looking at each other in more than one way and beginning to say, yes, we're on that journey of life. If you think of a force that said, at the end of the day, you realize the hands that shape you are always invisible. Because if you see the hands, you assume that they are doing it.
Right.
Rather than, in a way, you'd almost say they're the resistance that allows you to shape yourself.
Beautiful. Yes. That I believe hits the nail on the head.
What is the apple? And in this story, it's the story of Eve. She says that the gift of the apple is the gift of life. The chalice is the gift of the love of Adam and Eve, meaning that the gift of the womb is that Eve said to Adam, your love is so profound, your thoughts are so wonderful, you must allow them to be born. Now think about that. We've entered from the realm of eternal and timelessness into time. So the once grand cosmological fires, do you see, of Kuan Yin, it's been divided, are no longer ever present. And if we think about that as a love story, right? Once we were Isis and Osiris. We were gods and goddesses who were aligned with the stars. And suddenly, we turn from this time of love into a time of separation. And that's what this journey will show us, that to understand who we are uniquely, and that's why we can move to where I just showed you the chalice, the sense of the movement into the chalice. We'll start to look down and see the blossom. We'll look down and see the mother. And we'll look over here, do you see? And we'll see the ancestors, the Maya. And they're looking back into a time of fire.
Oh, look at that. That's amazing.
This is what the ancestors know. We're the keepers of the records.
Yeah.
I mean, they really are.
They are.
And this is the whole story. I mean,
timekeepers.
And the whole journey of Pahana, the lost white brother, interestingly enough, is this. We will keep this connection. You will go into the world, you see, on this great exodus. You will take the journey of the world and you will return to the ancestors, and your learned journey will finally have a basis in wisdom. And that's really where we look. Think of this story, that this is all connected, right? So we're starting to see this journey of the mother and the father. And this is where it becomes even more curious and delightful, because behind the blossom, you can see I'm holding the blossom, and for my physicists out there, location and speed of the electron, this is suggesting that the location is the human story, but that the energy behind it is the lost knowledge, which isn't really lost, of the goddess, or Lilith, because she's here. And nothing expresses the layered psyche better than that you see these are two qualities of oneness. That the one direction we see the purpose, the blossom, and on the other direction we see the roots, the energy. And these are both two qualities of the one. Now think about, in a visual language, this is the knowledge of the goddess, the time of the goddess. And why I say that is, we saw the apple over there, now you see the apple over here, but you see it's over my family photo album. So we think about family. This is the capacity to see each other in generation and with love. This is the knowledge of the goddess. This is going to be very important, because the sacrifice of the goddess is when we turn away from direct knowing. And this is also why Lilith is rejected and Eve becomes the wife of Adam. Both must be ignorant of their origins.
Right.
But Lilith is inside of Eve. She says that I will be the lioness that lives at the heart of woman, as Eve will be betrayed by Adam. Because Adam will turn into self-reflection, and on that hall of mirrors, on that journey, he will betray love over and over again. And so the question of this betrayal, and that's what's so beautiful here, is she says that now I want you to know that I have always been present, but hidden until now. Because you cannot know your story until you realize that you are not on the horizontal, but on the vertical. You are trees. And the truth is, if you live in Malibu as a tree, you don't try to get to Santa Monica. And that's her point. She's going to say that I turn myself inward, and we'll do that literally, do you see? And we will cover the family photo albums. And the question became, even as a motion picture, well, why did we take this journey? And she says, well, take me with you. So we start to journey around the corner here. Do you see it? That's why this becomes so movable and moving. Because this space then shows us the two hemispheres. And you can see that, do you see in the mirror? The journey of self-reflection.
Oh, yes.
And when you look at this side, do you see the journey of the mother, of love? Now, we would not be aware that there's a division between the two questions, that love connects and thought divides. But the beautiful thing here is actually saying, now, we hold the story of our, do you see, what we think of as alien, but it's really this greater self.
The elongated head.
The elongated head. Now, do you see it looks like a child in this?
Yes.
Again, innocent?
Right.
The quality here is in this innocence, in this ancientness, in this knowingness. We cannot, and this is the Lilith story, we cannot convince ourselves that we are separate. We know too much. So the question is, how do we create, quite literally, a smaller head? And take what was once in union and divide it as a right angle. And that's where you start to see this twin over and over again. As if to say the arc, like the two hemispheres, emerges, you see, from this greater vision when we hold that as a tree. And that's why Tor, I showed you earlier, is saying you grow out of this root system. But this consciousness for you is incomprehensible. In other words, you cut it in half to slow it down and humanize it. But from a human context now, you have access to this other quality. Which, as you know, think of the story here. If we're looking this direction, we can't see Lilith. This is a primary technology, which is very helpful because once we understand that, then
when you say primary, like primal almost?
Yeah, exactly. Because essentially we have been painting since we began.
Right.
Never to illustrate anything, but to create communion. Think of the dance, the improvisation of the hand, the sense of feeling the wood, feeling all of this that allows us to follow the grain, to feel. Everything has these hidden patterns. And that's where we see the watcher language. I'm really allowing the rhythmic nature, not to illustrate anything, to rise more and more, to bring into focus. Like I had no idea Lilith was, there's no illustration here. And that's why as I bring this out, you see, even in the sense of like having it on cards, so to speak, and it will show us that you have been on this journey across the ages, gathering the story of what does it mean to be human. You came from the mother of light, you were drawn down into the mother of dark, you now bring these two qualities together, do you see? And one, like the painting, cannot see the other side of the other. This is why if we have this, it says, I want you to remember, like you can remember the downstairs is there, even if we're not there. Remember so that your imagination allows you to connect that which you cannot see. And that's where she then comes out, as I say, and this is where the goddess, the Ancient One, returns home. That this knowledge can't be known except in the domestic space, because that's the truth of lover and beloved. And that's why her evolution is, I will take you back to Atlantean knowing. I will take you back to the time of the Watchers. But I won't take you back there to leave. That's narcissism. That's telling me you're an ancient king, and you don't need to be here because you're so important there. And this is the great terror of narcissism, is because Lilith destroys the illusion of the illusion. It's the hall of mirrors of the ego that are now, in a way, facing the creative spirit, and that truth that the creative spirit isn't interested in your cosmology, but really interested in your willingness to do what she's saying, which is follow me into this great story.
You got our magic GoPro over there.
Hello.
Excellent. So we'll get into the next race, which, you know, you mentioned Palladians earlier, and that's sort of one of these key archetypal races that many people, probably the most famous race, I would say, of all of the races, the most channeled. More people are channeling Palladians. There's more discussion around the Palladians than most of the other races. And the archetypes around that it's a very feminine energy. The lore is that there are cousins. They evolve from Lyra, the Lyran star system, and that lineage, and they're, you know, the seven sisters, from the Pleiades star system, and associated with the bird, or avian energy. The original sort of Palladian perspective that we had in the old days was blonde hair, blue eyes, Nordics, so to say, but we're learning now through my channel interviews and other material and other visitations that the Palladians, and this is probably with all races really, it's a vast race. It's a huge star system. You know, not just the seven sisters, but that's all we can see from our telescopes and whatnot. But when you actually go into that pocket of the star system. It's very vast, and there's
and the seventh star is invisible, so you can't actually see it from the.
Right.
It's very interesting.
The Mayans talk about the Pleiadians coming, or the Pleiadians, beings from the Pleiadians coming and giving them this book of knowledge that gave them arithmetic and farming practices, and sort of, I forget the name of the book, that carries the sacred knowledge to get them through their hard times, right? To this 3 days of darkness during these changing of these 5,200 year cycles. So with all that, and there's a lot more. I'm just skimming on the surface. Where do you feel the connections are?
That when we begin to understand, and we can use, this is where archetype becomes very helpful, because essentially you would almost say that the Arcturians are more the fool in the tarot, the capacity to be both in it and the causation of it. I really feel that this is where we start to step into a different relationship, where the Pleiadians really become Thoth, or Tot, but this is Thoth's library, interestingly enough. It's called the hieroglyph of the human soul, so this becomes Thoth's library.
Thoth is the beak,
yeah,
right?
The ibis-headed,
the avian.
And he's the one really that becomes the herald, the teacher of agriculture, math, all of the great principles. So if we think of Hermes as well, this as above, so below, this becomes the sense that the Pleiadians are involved in 7 principles, that there's a septenary nature to man, the 7th principle being invisible. Now the projection into the star system, as we see this projected back to us, so it becomes a philosophical template.
Almost correlating with the chakras.
Exactly. Do you see? So that's how it lives in us. And it's transmuted through our imagination, not to go there, but to actually realize we're rising out of these different conditions. You'd almost say, I'm rising out of this crown chakra, out of this Arcturian connectedness of systems, down into, not down, that's wrong, it's not a hierarchical, it's in a sense the qualities that when we think of the septenary nature, this is where we think of the base of the pyramid, the 4, and the 3 rising to the apex. It's the hidden center at the apex when we rise out of all of these conditions. But the quality of setting the structures, of building the pyramid, creating the conditions that allows for the interface, you see, with this other mind, is, I believe, the genius of the Pleiadians, meaning they're star system builders and the builders of archetypal structure, understanding that theirs is to translate into physical terms or human terms, star knowledge, and that wisdom is wisdom regardless of form. So it's cat wisdom. If you start thinking of the Egyptian pantheon, right, you start understanding, yes, that the cat wisdom, this is what is so important, is the feline consciousness, meaning the pre-separation. So this is a quality, you think from an acting point of view, right? So feel that. It's a different perception, and when we understand this is the fertile ground from which the implantation of the star seeds grow in a way like an arc across the ages, saying that once you see the translation is not in the outward form, but it signifies a greater condition. Do you see, it's almost as you say the Pleiadian stars fall to earth. We rise out of that context, realizing that that's what's leavening our archetypal structure, right? It's saying you grow from a star system structure. You're not unique. You are part of this septenary consciousness of, you'd say, the 4 elements and the higher mind, soul, and spirit. So when we understand this, in a way, this is why the divine teachers come, the Manus, the Hermes, meaning that first we proceed by saying these are the golden templates, because you're establishing a foundation. And that's the importance of the Pleiadians. I really do think that they're trying to say, if you want to know who you are, turn away from the optics.
Right.
Turn to the resonance. Trust the stars not outside of yourself, but take that imaginative journey and allow that energy to arise as this perception of, yes, I am woven of these archetypal lenses that are set in motion by a quality of our greater consciousness that realizes it's not to go there, as I say, because we wouldn't really understand. Think about time as being a condition, a container, and if you're out of sequence, you're going to get parts but not be able to put it together. That's what's interesting to think about, that actually we're trying to create coherence by gathering the story back into this condition.
That's what I think their great goal was, to take the Hermetic journey of as above, so below through the symbolical structure, to finally bring it to a human coordinate point where we literally hold the star system in our intimate space. And therefore, I think the greater language of wisdom would say, yes, that's when we can commune, because you're not trying to come to us. You no longer think of us in time, but like this, a greater dome in which you are held. And once you trust it more and more, it again becomes that which releases our resistance. We're all holding different parts of a treasure map, essentially, trying to put it together, where in a way it creates a deep enough lens where it itself has found a way to transmute its own energy, to humanize its expression, where we're able to embrace, again, it's a shifting of energy. And I do feel that a lot of what this is trying to, if you think of the hand, like the bud, right? And we're really bound by these different qualities. It's interesting, 5 different races, right?
Yeah.
Like the fingers. So the contraction is that first we must grasp, like the bud. But once we trust that we're woven of these different relationships, then we begin to open, you see, to blossom. And it's not about the old condition of this, but it's in a way, the emerging condition of, oh, I realize I must breathe. That to me, that it's saying that once we understand that it is about breath, about breathing, and about, in a sense, disenchanting ourselves from being about time, but rather this larger cumulative awareness that for ages upon ages has been laying the ground for us, for our time, to really blossom as the human form divine, to understand that the great gift is that we are each an art form of consciousness. We're not born into time, we're born into creation. So the question of again, the races become, if the Arcturians are, in a way, the entire story, and the Pleiadians are the ones that implement the story. What's the next race?
Well, let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum and go into the Zeta Reticuli, which are coming from, according to Lisa's channelings, the Zeta would be the opposite end of the spectrum of the Pleiades, coming from the Vega lineage, which is associated with the serpent. And that funnels into the Sirius lineage, which is more, again, serpent. Some people call it the dog star, Anubis, coming from Sirius. But really the Zeta, so before we go into the Sirius in the next block, but Zetas being on the opposite end of the spectrum, these beings that are very masculine, very logic, Spock in Star Trek, but even further into that sort of almost robotic, very hive mind consciousness. And we know from all of the abduction cases and Whitley and all of these other things that these beings, so there's sort of a lore, a story that they lost sort of a clone race that went so far into their evolution where they destroyed their planet, they over-masculinized their whole experience and pollution and nuclear weapons and all these sort of things. So they had to go into hiding underground, and they lost their ability to reproduce, so they cloned and they just started creating copies over copies over copies, eventually degrading into not being able to reproduce at all. And technology failed them. So, and this is just one of many stories, but I'm sort of sticking with this one because most of my audience sort of knows this story. It's come up several times. Then they, so in order to continue life, they had to come into our space-time continuum and made sort of a soul contract with us prior to our incarnations here to take our DNA, so they could hybridize with the humans because there was a close DNA match there, and then create these hybrid beings.
If we look at each of these qualities as players in a greater play,
right?
Her chart's very helpful because you'll see from these greater universal principles, Sirius and Orion, really Newt And we have also then the relationship of Orion with Geb, and that's actually what the hieroglyph behind you is, which I redrew because I was very interested in this relationship of Sirius, the dog star, and then Orion being the relationship, of course, of the quality of the masculine and feminine, this great relationship of the king and queen. And that she becomes the vault of heaven. In a sense, you'd say the one, right, that rises. And even she has an invisible star. But this great queen of heaven becomes the vault within which, or the womb within which, human conditions, in a sense the waters, can arise. And in this condition, a bit like Isis and Osiris, they're really the turning down of these two energies into the form that help us understand that the question was coming in through these God qualities of, again, how do we take star knowledge, this knowledge of Orion, the knowledge of Sirius, and in a way, and even the Egyptians say we came from the land of the Watchers, that in the ancient ones, that Osiris and Isis aren't figures of symbolical representation, they're actual beings that come. And when you look at texts, you know, from theosophy, from the study of the secret doctrine, you know, you learn about how there really is this call from different slokas, as they're called, or spheres, meaning that essentially we're going to have qualities of consciousness that all donate in one way or another different qualities. You'd almost say the star system is showing up into a grand stew of consciousness, as if to say that the only way we're going to actually compose a universal being is by adding in all of its universal in a sense, ingredients. So you're going to have everything from a type of clone-like consciousness to an exalted consciousness, because in a way that's the container, the truth that we are all that. And I do feel that if you think of the races symbolically, as you do with archetype and structurally, you begin to honor the fact that to know why these conditions are as they are, languaged as species and consciousness, is to say that you really are dealing with living qualities. That these, and I learned this with the archetypes and the tarot, because often you look at these things and say, oh, I'm just making it up. Right. But the deeper you go, you realize, no, this is making me up. Yes. You know? Exactly. And that's why I feel like a lot of this knowledge is not trying to overwhelm. You know, think of trying to slowly dissolve resistance so this greater knowledge doesn't distract, doesn't disconnect, but finally connects to a deeper root system that says the reason this is so difficult is, think of the wiring involved, right? Of translating multidimensional stories in space and consciousness, slowing this down into a temporal vehicle that itself will experience itself as an act of duration, right? And then a composite that is creating the library, and I do feel that this is Osiris and Isis and Sirius and Orion, meaning, and that the Pleiadian, all of these effects, if we think of them as actors in harmony, meaning that because we're creating a holographic being, a universal being, I will hold the Pleiadian, you will hold the Sirian, you will hold the Arcturian, and you almost think of a jazz ensemble, right? And we'll put the universe together brilliantly, because there will be no mistakes. We'll lean into those things and figure out just how more wonderful it is than we thought. You know, think of that as a greater creative ideal, its willingness to endure its own darkness, because it gets this sense that behind that is a calling toward. And I almost feel like if people deal with the relationships and the channelings intimately, not as a scientific proof, but more of a creative, intimate relationship that says, I don't want to, in a sense, turn you into a debater. Don't use me to prove something. Think of me as a love affair. Think of me what you actually hide, you keep private, until you find those that share these qualities. Because this is what I think of a lot of the martial art here, is saying that we've come from a time of building a self that was always in a world that didn't care and we were always up against. And that finally it's turning us back toward one another and saying, oh, I see in you the human struggle that I see in me. But I see the artistry behind it not as it was to solve something, but to resolve a greater quest that wasn't getting it right. But in a sense, always, if you think about it, by degree, trying to reveal there's a deeper beauty. But in every human story, it's that we earn that beauty, which is, of course, the Grail story here, right? It's like you're home. You don't get out of responsibility when you're home. And you don't use creativity to escape, and you don't use the stories of aliens to not be present.
Right.
And this is why I think a lot of times we put on airs, and I feel like everything has brought us to our knees going, don't use me as anything other than that which inspires you to remember you are worthy of a universal relationship, but that universal relationship is in your heart, and that will feed your dreams, which will change the view of the world, which will, of course, transform the world for all of us. Do you see Newt up here on the ceiling? Can you see her on the I-beam?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is the story of Newt and Geb, retold unexpectedly, but we're going to see how she comes up from the floor and vaults over the ceiling, and we see her face on the I-beam. And you can't be symbolically more delighted than that. How do you see her face? Well, I beam. When you beam, you see, you open, you smile, and suddenly the roof holds itself, but it lifts as high as it can. And that's the vaulted Newt.
This would be the Syrian
absolutely
energy here.
And do you see how her womb is the light? Her heart is the infant. Her journey is the egg, the heron and the shell, this great arc of human consciousness. And you start to see the serpent, you see the blind serpent as her belly button, meaning that the serpent of evolution is this great journey. And actually you can follow this. It flows all the way around the roof over to that egg above the chalice, as if to say we're finally in this greater signature of things. That Newt above shows us that the journey begins in innocence, and that we take a journey across the ages, because as we come down, we're going to see this great relationship that as one stands here, we become a watcher, meaning we do not see our face or our reflection. We see ourselves as essence. And this whole journey, this dance, is that we try to return, but we can't. And so in this room, we set the wheel of time and eternity in motion. We go downstairs into the structure, into the archetypes, and we will go into the domestic, meaning how do we do this? How do we live? And finally here we will come back up into the structure, and again as a type of immersive theater, because as one steps here, this is where we see the revelation of the tarot as a structure, as an operating system. You can see the square, do you see the foundation? And the wheel, just as in squaring the circle. But here we're going to see this relationship like a gyroscope, that once we set the wheel in motion, it creates balance. The foundation is not which character do we believe in or not believe in, but they create like a piano, the structure that holds us. And as we tilt up this way, this story that takes us into the story of ascension. And we see Anumas and Thoth and Ra and Nagas, meaning all of this journey. And down here we can see the pyramids, the story of the Romans. In other words, that we're going to go across the ages asking over and over again, what does it mean to be human? And what is extraordinary is here we see essentially that ever-vanishing Bindu point, but we start to see this Christus, this story of the light of mind that finally does not anchor, do you see the pillars on the ground? It's that the light of mind opens this other quality of consciousness. If we think physiologically, this is actually a manifestation of we enter the world this way. We stand up into this so that we go into these two eyes, duality. But once we achieve the balance of these things, do you see, it's to do this. It's to hold the greater eye of wonder in the balance of form and structure. So it's a bit like saying it's finally the piano holds the music.